Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to take a look at the Megadap ETZ21 Pro adapter that allows you to use Sony E-mount lenses on a Nikon Z-mount camera. One thing I quickly found is that this is a very different experience from old school adapters. I've used a lot of adapters over the years. Often it's to take a DSLR mount and to convert it into a mirrorless mount, either within a system or from one brand to another. I've obviously used various adapters for old school mounts like M42 and various Pentax K mounts like that to adapt typically manual focus lenses. This is a very different experience. Probably my favorite adapter of the Canon EF to Sony E-mount era was the Sigma MC11, and so I'll just use that as kind of a case in point here. The Sigma MC11, which allowed you to use Canon EF on Sony FE, it was 26 millimeters in length and it weighed 125 grams. So it definitely changed the nature of a lens, both in its weight, but then in particular in its balance point, having to move it out. And that difference, that 26 millimeters, was required for the different flange distance to come from a camera mount with a mirror to get the optical path of the lens to a place where it needed to be for a camera without a mirror. So, I mean, I personally found that I tired of that process. I didn't like the way that lenses looked or balanced, and so eventually I just replaced my Canon EF lenses steadily with equivalents in either Canon RF or in Sony E-mount. So in this particular case, with this Megadap adapter, it is a completely different reality. First of all, the adapter itself is only 2 millimeters thick, and it weighs only, on my scale, 46 grams. And so basically, it is the equivalent of just having a different actual lens mount there. It's not like it's an adapter that adds any kind of noticeable thickness. And in fact, once you have it mounted on your camera, the truth of the matter is that I suspect you won't even notice that it's there. Everything mounts stably without wobble in there. And for the most part, the adapter just works, allowing you to use those Sony E-mount lenses from a variety of brands, in this case, which we'll explore more, on the Nikon Z-mount cameras. In this case, I've tested on the Nikon Z8. But this does include APS-C, and Megadap claims, at least as of this moment, that they are the only adapter that allows you to do that. I'm actually going to be looking at a few adapters this week. So today I'm looking at the Megadap ETZ21 Pro, but I'll also look at a less expensive option from the popular brand Neewer, the Neewer NW-ETZ adapter. And then at the end of the week, I'll do a head-to-head comparison between the two and let you know what you're kind of gaining, what you're losing by going with a more expensive adapter. In this case, the more expensive Megadap cost about $250 US. So is it worth it? Well, that's what we're going to explore in today's review. Today's episode is brought to you by the Flexispot C7, an ergonomic chair that has more range of adjustment than any office chair that I've used before. I spend a lot of long hours at my computer doing research, editing photos and videos, and creating my reviews. Using a chair with bad ergonomics ends up causing me back or hip pain, so the Flexispot C7 is a godsend. Rather than just the typical up and down adjustments, the C7 has adjustable lumbar to support your lower back, the ability to adjust the arms up and down, backwards and forwards, and even side to side, and also the ability to adjust the seat forwards and backwards, which is great for me with my long legs. There's even a relaxation mode that allows you to lean back after a long day. I've even found that the casters roll more smoothly than most office chairs. Now there's some fun. As with other Flexispot products, there's a broad range of customization options for fabrics, colors, and accessories. Visit Flexispot.com to get your new chair, and if you use the code 24BFC7, you can save an additional $50 off the C7. So visit Flexispot.com today. So let's start by talking about the build and handling. First of all, this is not only the second generation of their adapters. They had an ETZ11 to begin with. Now this ETZ21 or ETZ21 Pro replaces a older ETZ21. And so what is different between the ETZ21 and then the Pro model? Well, a couple of things. First of all, you now can do firmware updates in the camera just like native lenses. And so that is obviously a significant improvement. It has a better mechanical fit and design to allow for more third-party lenses to fit properly. And I did find, I tested with 4 different brands, and I found that I had 0 issues with the fit on any of them. It also has a redesigned lens release button here on the side. And so obviously, while I haven't used the previous one, I can say that this current one works works well. I also did a little bit of research and found that in the year that this adapter has been out, the Pro version has been out, there have actually been 5 firmware updates. So that's always important to me because, you can say, well, it's firmware updatable, but if you never offer up any kind of firmware, obviously you're not really supporting the product. It seems like Megadap is doing that. And as I looked through some user reviews, it seems like some of the issues that people addressed along the way, either having some compatibility issues after, say on this Z8, after the firmware 2.0, some people had a compatibility issue. That was solved via firmware. Obviously, I've tested it on the Z8 without any kind of issue. There's bugs that have been squashed through that. They've improved the function, and they've added compatibility to include brands like Viltrox, for example, which I'll do some Viltrox tests today. So as noted, it is only 2 millimeters thick, and so really, really tiny. It's made of, I believe, a stainless steel product, so it seems tough and durable from what I can tell. I noted that lens mounted in what I would consider a good balance. The tolerances are good there to where lenses fit without me having to force them or to feel like I can't remove them. But they also fit well enough to where I don't feel a wobble afterwards. And so kind of that, perfect medium that I'm looking for there. So in this case, pretty simple because it's so thin. You have at the front of the adapter, you have the contacts for the Sony lens to touch to, and at the rear you have the contacts to communicate with the Nikon Z body. And I'm assuming there's some kind of processor in between that's going to take the focus information from the Nikon camera and interpret it to the control of the focus motors in the Sony E-mount based lens. One thing I did note that I'll talk more about in the comparison review, but relative to the newer adapter, I did find that the Megadap is the one that produces proper XF information. And so I found that lenses, as I looked in Lightroom, the XF information, that it was properly reported, which is important, obviously, for sorting at a later date. And so I certainly appreciated that. So how about the actual autofocus process? That's really what it's coming down to. As you might expect, or I hope you would expect, the focus speed that you're able to achieve with an individual lens really depends a lot on how fast it can focus on its native mount. So faster focusing lenses like Sony G Master with their multiple linear XD focus motors, those are going to focus quite quickly. And in fact, here you can see that I adapted this Sony 50mm f1.4 G Master lens, and I compared it to the Nikon 50mm f1.4 that I've just reviewed, and I found that, in fact, the GM lens, even adapted, focused faster than what the Nikon lens did. It stands to reason. We've got dual linear focus motors, high-speed linear focus motors in the GM lens. We have only a STM motor in the Nikon lens. So if you've got a fast-focusing lens on native, it's going to still focus fast, just a little bit slower. I would say that what you can take as a rule of thumb is that autofocus speed is always going to be just a little bit slower than what it was on its native mount. Remember that there is data conversions having to take place. Focus algorithms from one platform being converted to the focus algorithms of another. So there is going to be a little bit of slowdown in the pipeline, but fortunately, if you have a fast lens to begin with, it's still going to focus fast. I did find kind of one consistent quirk just in real world use, and that was that when I was out shooting and I wanted to focus on a foreground subject, it was typically the case to where the lens wanted to focus on the background rather than on the foreground subject. And so in that process, I had to do the typical thing that if I was focusing on something that was just kind of enclosed there, I would actually focus either down at the ground or at something that was a little bit thicker, a little bit higher contrast. And if I could move focus into that space, I could then go ahead and I could get proper autofocus, as you can see in this particular shot. What I did find, however, is that when focus was locked, in the proper zone, that focus was actually very accurate. And I had no issues with getting accurate focus even at wide apertures like f1.4. Now, interestingly, I happen to have 2 lenses of the same lens in 2 different mounts. And so in the case of the Viltrox AF 16mm f1.8, I had both the Sony E-mount version and then the Nikon Z-mount version. So I could do some direct comparisons. What I found is that, as you can see here, the native Z-mount version definitely focused faster. However, I did find that focus was fast enough, using the adapted E-mount version, that in real-world use it was just fine. But you will get a little bit more focus speed on the native lens, as you would probably expect. What I also found, however, is that there was, as far as the sharpness, I didn't find like there was any kind of loss. It was kind of like some give and take in the frame, which to me points more to the sample variation between the two copies of the lens rather than any kind of adapter related issue. So for example, I saw that I got better center sharpness with the Z mount version. I actually got better edge performance with the Sony E mount version. And so again, there's not enough there to attribute to an adapter. I also found that I didn't really see extra chromatic aberrations. Flare resistance was about the same. All of these things I basically expected because there is no optical glass in this adapter. It's just air going through there. And basically all it is, other than changing the focus, is just a little tiny spacer to move everything, that 2 millimeters forward where the optical path is correct for a Sony lens, mounted on a Z mount body. So anyway, it basically worked the way that I thought that it should. The one thing I will say that popped up for me optically is that I found that in many situations I tended to get a little bit of underexposure using adapted lenses on the Z mount body, and I found that if I dialed in a third or even 2/3 of stop of exposure, it actually got me more into the right zone. I would say that on average I underexposed by about a half stop when using lenses on the adapter. And in the head-to-head comparison, they in fact did meter differently using the exact same lens, one adapted, one in the native mount. So it's just something to, maybe think about for the future. Now, another fast-focusing third-party lens is the Tamron 35 to 150 millimeter with its VXD, voice coil motor, and I found that autofocus was nice and snappy with that, definitely very usable. I did find, however, when Nala was trotting towards me in that kind of persistent action, that the results were not bad. It's not like autofocus wasn't moving, but what I did find is a consistent mild back focus to where rather than being on her eye, it was more like in the middle of her neck where focus actually was. It was close enough that the results don't look bad. They don't look completely out of focus, but they're not crisp either. So I wouldn't recommend this combination if you're, or really any of these adapted lenses. If you're going to shoot high-speed action, you need a native mount lens. You're going to get better results in that regard. But for most things and most situations, focus was just fine, and focused accurately, focused quickly, and in general, I was very happy with the results that I got. So how about on the video side of things? I found that with previous adapted scenarios, video AF was pretty much garbage. In this case, it's actually fairly decent. I found that focus works for, for example, purposely doing focus pulls, autofocus pulls back and forth. I found that there's a little bit more pulsing in the process, as you can see, and every now and then kind of a start of a backwards focus rack, just a little bit less overall focus confidence. Again, not unexpected in this situation. If, for example, when using a lens with a little bit slower autofocus scenario, which would be like the Sigma 85mm f1.4, again, a single STM focus motor, I find that, as you can see here, it focused fairly smoothly as I approached the camera using the Megadap adapter. But what I did find is that when I ducked out of the frame and then ducked back into the frame, you can see it really didn't pick me back up. I switched over to the Sony 50mm f1.4, again, a more confident focusing lens, and I found that it was able to, fairly quickly and successfully pick me back up when I stepped back into frame. So again, here's your rule of thumb. Better lenses, when it comes to autofocus, are going to produce better results when you adapt them. If you're using older lenses or cheap lenses that didn't have a great autofocus system to begin with, you might be disappointed with the results you're going to get. If you're using good lenses with good autofocus, then you're probably going to be generally happy with the results that you get. So my conclusion is this: if you have actually switched camera systems, or more like myself, you own multiple systems, being able to fairly seamlessly use your Sony E-mount lenses on Nikon Z cameras is pretty fantastic. You're getting that proper XF data, getting proper information for the in-camera VR, all of these various things, and autofocus works really well overall for when shooting stills, and reasonably well even when shooting video. So in general, I was not at all disappointed with the results that I got. I do know from experience, it can be a very expensive process to sell off lenses in one brand, one mount, and then replace them with new lenses in another brand or another mount. And so this is a great way to save money, particularly if you have a lens that you love. For example, there really isn't an equivalent of this Sony 50mm f1.4 G Master on Nikon right now. So the ability to use a really exceptional lens and use it quite well on Nikon is definitely intriguing. I think above all, what is going to make this more usable in the long term for people is the fact that the adapter itself is so compact and it's so low weight that it really doesn't disrupt your shooting process at all. And I suspect that you're going to be happy with the results you're able to get, and also happy with the overall usability, because you've sacrificed so little in the adapting process. And frankly, for me, that's often where things have fallen apart in the past. I just kind of get sick of using the adapter, and in this case, it feels like that would be less of an issue overall. Time will tell as I move ahead, but I certainly love the option of using my mini Sony E-mount lenses in a variety of brands on my Nikon Z-mount camera, and I suspect you will do the same. I'm Dustin Abbott. I hope that this has helped you today. If you want more information, I do have linkage to my full text review in the description down below. There's also some buying links there if you'd like to purchase one for yourself. As always, thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.